Please, can you hear me? Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? So today we'll be discussing about some of the current issues. As well as we'll be discussing about the main standards as well. So main standard means some of the reporting standards, that is IFRS 8, IAS 24. We'll be discussing about some of these disclosure standards. Along with that, we will complete this section today. Okay. So what do you mean by current issues? So in the current issues part, we have to mainly deal with um, the new changes which are happening in our current accounting world. So it can be either in the form of practice statement. So practice statement means, let's say if there is a change happening to the materiality. Okay. So materiality is not a standard. It's not like an accounting standard we have. The materiality is just like a assumption we having. Or it's like a certain kind of measurement that we are taking. It's known as materiality. So if there is any changes to the materiality happens, it will be written in the practice statement, because practice statement means this is how it should be practiced, or certain kind of assumptions or conventions or rules which you have to practice or which you have to follow. Okay. So if there is any change in such kind of assumptions or something like that, then it will be coming, the changes will be reflected in the practice statement. And apart from that, we will be discussing about some of the exposure draft. So exposure draft means it's a last stage of our standard evaluation of a standard. So next stage of exposure draft will be the declaration of that particular standard. So what are the changes happening to a particular standard will be written in the exposure draft. Okay. So before this exposure draft coming into place, we'll be keeping these suggestions for discussion. Okay. So it will be written in the form of discussion paper. So mainly these are the different types of elements which you have to go through here in current issues. So we'll be discussing about certain discussion papers, practice statement, as well as we will be discussing about exposure draft. Okay, so especially I will be discussing about some of the recent exposure draft which is come into place. So there is a higher chance that these things can get tested in this particular sem. So is it clear, everyone? So before going into current issue, you need to know that what do you mean by current issues, or what are the different contents which can come as a part of current issues. So is it clear, everyone? What do you mean by this exposure draft, practice statement, as well as discussion paper? Have you understood the difference between these three items? Okay, so now I will discuss about the current issues. So can you see the note? Can you see the note now? Yeah. So these are the main changes or main current issues, key current issues that we have to taken care of. So first one, it is reverse consensus framework. Of course, we have learned that in the start of our section. I have discussed about the changes that happened to the recognition criteria, as well as some of the changes which happened to the assets and definitions of different items such as assets and liabilities. So it is something which is already covered in the first part of our section. Okay. So now I will be focusing upon some of the other factors such as what happens, what are the recent current issues which you have to deal with regards to the accounting policy changes, and as well as materiality, then defined benefit plan amendments, curtailments, and settlement, and better communication projects and management commentary. Along with that, I will be discussing about business combination, debt and equity, and deferred tax. So these are the main changes or main current issues we have to taken care of. So of course, you don't need to study it like a no article. It's just like a factor that you just need to have a summarized knowledge about what are the impact of these changes which will happen to the future current issue. Okay. So just one minute. Okay. Okay. So first one with regards to accounting policy changes. So whenever there is a change in accounting policy, we know that we have to make the changes retrospectively or prospectively, which is something which I have shared with you. Last day I have shared a video with you with regards to IAS 8. I hope you guys have gone through it. Apart from that, in many instances, when we have discussed about different accounting standard, I've told you about how to deal with the change in accounting policy. So how will you deal with the change in accounting policy? How will you make that changes? Will you make the changes prospectively or retrospectively? When there is a change in accounting policy, how will you do the changes? We'll be making the changes retrospectively, right? Yeah, perfect. But the standard says that of course we have to make the changes retrospectively. So here they have told that calculate the prior impact of the accounting policy changes is costly and time consuming process. So we know that the practical terms, in order to revisit the earlier financial statement and to recalculate these figures, of course is time consuming and we will be incurring certain cost. So of course every board members is very much concerned about the fact that whether whether this retrospective changes will incur the more cost and it will not bring as much as benefit as we expect. Okay. So the board is concerned that the retrospective applications discourage industry from voluntary changing the accounting policy, even though the change would beneficial this financial statement users. But that cost and the timing. So these are the two concerns currently we have when we are making the changes retrospectively. Okay. So the board is particularly concerned about the change in policy that arises as a result of agenda decision made by IFRS Interpretation Committee. So they are coming up with a proposal. So I have told that it's an exposure draft. So exposure draft means it's the last stage of an evolution to a accounting standard. So of course these changes will start reflecting in your IAS 8 as well. Okay. So board have come up with an exposure draft. So in this exposure draft, they have clearly stated about the fact that whenever there is a change in the accounting policy, the agenda or the main decision is considering this some of the main items. First one, it is impracticable to do so because maybe if whenever we are making the retrospective changes, if we doesn't have enough data or if we can't, like there should be a limitation. It's like if you're keeping a threshold limit like 5 years or 10 years, Suppose if the company is not able to obtain that data for 5 year or the last 10 year, then it will be difficult for them. Okay, so there should not be any threshold limit or something like that. Apart from that, the cost of working out the effect of changes exceeds the benefit of the user. So we need to check the fact that whether the cost which we incur in making this retrospective changes is actually giving a benefit. It's like cost versus benefit analysis. It is something which is introduced to even the recognition criteria of our accounting of conceptual framework as well. So the same factors are considering here. So first of all, I have told that first one, there is no particular threshold limit. So that's the first change. Like they haven't told that any 5 year limit or a 10 year limit we have to go back. It's up to the date where it is practically possible. We can make the retrospective change up to the date where it is practically possible. Okay, so when considering the benefit to the users of retrospective application, the board proposed the entities to consider these two factors. First one, the magnitude of change. So what do you mean by magnitude of change, whether it is material or not? Then the pervasiveness of the change. Pervasiveness means if you are making that change out of the total assertions we have in the financial statement, assertion means there can be assets as well as liability. So how many financial items are getting affected by this change? That's what it mean by pervasiveness. Okay, so even we should consider the nature of change, that user could well underestimate the impact that arises in the several future periods. So it's like whether it will make the financial statements more comparable. Okay, so these are the main benefits we have to consider. First one, we should check the factor that whether it is a material change we have to make, whether it is affecting the most of the financial state, most of the items in the financial statement. So that's why it is known as, it is meant to say that the pervasiveness of the change. Apart from that, we should also consider the nature of change, as well as we should be able to clearly state the fact that if you are making the changes, it will improve the comparability. So these are the benefits that we have to consider when we are making the changes. When you are making the changes as per the change in accounting policy, if you are making a retrospective change, these are the factors that you need to consider. Is it clear, everyone? What are the benefits you have to consider here? So this benefit is now compared with the cost. So what are the cost? The cost means the additional effort or the cost in accumulating the data, as well as we need to check will that change in accounting policy affects the materiality results already disclosed in the last period. Okay, so these are the two factors, these are the cost factors we have to consider. What are the additional cost in accumulating this data, as well as when we are making this accounting policy changes, whether this materiality results already disclosed in the last period, whether it is affecting any of the comparability or something like that. Okay, so whenever we are doing a change in the retrospective change as per IAS 8, we have to consider the cost as well as the benefit. So if you get to know that this cost is exceeding the benefit, then we don't need to make any retrospective changes. But if the cost is not exceeding the benefit, then we can go ahead with the retrospective amendments. Is it clear, everyone? What's the current issue currently we have with regards to IAS 8? So is it clear, everyone? Any doubts on that part? Is it clear, guys? Okay, Richard is like, you have a question there. Yeah, of course, whenever there is a change in the accounting policy, one of the main confusion here is how you treat the change from revaluation model to cost model. Of course is a change in accounting policy, but it is the one of the assumption in which we will make the changes prospectively, because sometimes it will be impracticable to make the changes retrospectively. So even though change in the accounting policy, that is from revaluation model to cost model or something like that, of course it is a accounting policy, change in accounting policy, but we are having the assumption here we can make the changes prospectively, because it will be impracticable to restate the figures in the last year. Is it clear? Richard? Okay, fine. So next one is with the change is happened in the materiality. Okay, we know that whenever it's like a materiality concept, of course we have to consider the fact that materiality is something like we have to follow whenever we are preparing or interpreting the financial statements. Okay, so there are some changes happen to the materiality judgment. It is proposed by the board, but I have told that it is proposed in the form of a practice statement. It's proposed in the form of a practice statement. So this provides some non-mandatory guidance that may help the preparers of financial statements when applying IFRS standard. So the old definition was, if any of the omission or misstatement, if it can affect the economic decision of the user, then we will call it as materiality. If any, that's what it is given here. If the information is material, if omitting or misstating it could influence decision that make on the basis of the financial info about a specific reporting entity. Okay, so that's the difference we have. This is our old definition. So in the new definition, they have come up with something known as obscuring. Obscuring means intentional misstatement. Intentionally, if you are doing any misstatement, and if it can affect the economic decision of the user, it's like transfers scattered or disclosed using unclear language. So here we are intentionally making a misstatement in the presentation, which can reasonably expected to influence the economic decision of the user. Then even that should be considered as a material transaction. Okay, so that's the main change that came to the materiality definition. So earlier it was like omission or misstatement, if it is affecting the economic decision of the user, we can consider it as material. So now they have come up with a new change that we have to check whether we are making any obscuring item there. The item is also material if it is obscuring. What do you mean by obscuring? Some intentional misstatement that we are providing here in the, by using some unclear language, we are intentionally trying to hide something from the financial user, and if it can affect reasonably expected to influence the economic decision of the user, then of course that particular item can be considered as a material item. So have you understood the main change that have happened to the definition of materiality? That word obscuring have came to the place. The first one is the addition of word obscuring. Then addition of word could reasonably expected to influence. Earlier it was like it could influence. So now it has changed to reasonably. That change have came there. If it is reasonably expected to influence, then we can consider it as a material. The concept of materiality does not just help to determine whether the transaction is recognized in the FS, but also how they are presented. Okay, so the materiality, it is not just discussing about how it is recognized in the FS, even the presentation. Even in the presentation, if you are using some unclear language, even that should be considered as a material effect. So when we are, apart from that, we know that these are some of the old changes. When we are assessing the materiality, what are the factors we have to consider? So revenue, we'll consider revenue, 1% of revenue, 2% of profit, and total asset. So there are certain figures or certain rules that we will take up to consider the materiality amount. So 1% of revenue or 1 to 2% of profit. Okay, these are the some of the materiality level that we keep. So if that error or misstatement is above this particular level, then we'll consider it as a material change. Okay, even there are some of the qualitative factors as well. So it is like material by nature. Qualitative factor means if the related party disclosure, or if there is an inclusive calculation, or it is related to a different geography or wider economic uncertainty. So these are some of the qualitative factors we have to consider to judge that whether it is material or not. Then material judgments are relevant to recognition, measurement, presentation, and disclosure of the decisions. So it is very important to understand the concept behind materiality. So I hope now you understood what the main changes have came. The main thing is something with regards to obscuring, as well as the addition of that word instead of saying expected is like reasonable expectation have came into place. Is it clear, everyone? Any doubts? The materiality amount change? Any doubts in the current issue of materiality? Perfect. Okay. Next main change have came up to the IAS 19 part. So even this is something which you have discussed earlier in our standard, that is IAS 19. So what's the current problem with IAS 19? Whenever there is a plan amendment or settlement or IAS settlement or curtailment, as per the current IAS 19, does not require us to make the changes or remeasure the remeasure the net interest component, as well as remeasure the service cost for the remaining period by using updated assumption. So that's a drawback of IAS 19. So in the recent reversed IAS 19, they have come up with an argument that whenever there is a plan amendment or curtailment or settlement, during that period, the entity must make the entity must redetermine this service cost component as well as the net interest component for the remaining period. Okay, the current service cost for the remainder of the reporting period after plan amendment, settlement, or curtailment using the actual assumption used to remeasure the net defined liability. So we have to remeasure the current service cost for the remaining period as well as the net interest for the remainder of the reporting period after plan amendment, settlement, or curtailment using the remeasured defined benefit deficit and the discount rate used to remeasure the defined benefit deficit. So this is the main change have came into IAS 19. Even we have done some problems with regards to this. Okay, so it is already covered in our revision phase when I have discussed about IAS 19 part. Is it clear? Perfect. So this is the main change have came to IAS 19. So next one is about the better communication project. So better communication projects have come up with an idea that currently in our efforts, there are some irrelevant informations are getting disclosed, as well as there are some relevant information are not getting disclosed, as well as it is not communicated in a more effective way. So that's the reason this project have come up with a suggestion that there should be a different in the way we are presenting the items in the financial statements. So currently we don't have a separate like currently we are just while we are preparing P&L, we are just focusing on the gross profit as well as net profit. We are not giving a separate disclosure for earnings before interest and tax. So it is the better communication project suggests that we have to give a separate line item called as earnings before interest and tax, which because it can give a better relevant information for the user. Okay, in the same way, one of the other important factor we are discussing here is like it requires an income and expense from the investment category. So almost like how we are disclosing the things in our cash flow statement. So in cash flow statements, we know that basically we are just focusing on the different types of activities, right? We are creating a cash flow for investing cash flow, as well as there is an operating cash flow. So it helps the users to identify the fact that what are the different types of cash flows we received from different types of activities. So in the same way, when we are preparing P&L as well, we should keep a separate heading and we should disclose the income and expense from the investment category separately. So there is a very high chance that most of the user does not look at cash flow statement. So even by they will be more focused on P&L statement. So by looking at the P&L statement, if they want to get a better clarity over these stuffs, so they just need to focus on this income and expense from the investment category. Okay, and providing guidance on the presentation of management performance measures, and it creates a better way of communicating the OCA element. So these are the main changes have came to the better communication projects. So better communication projects mean to say that so currently there are some too much irrelevant informations are getting disclosed, as well as too relevant informations are not getting disclosed, as well as there are some incorrect way of communication of information in our FS. So as per the changes happen to this, as per the suggestion made by the better communication projects, is mean to say that we should disclose the items in a more effective way to the users, which will be beneficial for them to make the economic decision. So these are the suggested changes to be done. It is like first one, we should be requiring an EBIT, that is operating profit margin should be calculated, as well as requiring an income and expense from the investment category should be disclosed separately, and providing guidance on the presentation of management performance measures, as well as better way of communicating the OCA part. Okay, so these are the different elements that we currently have with regards to the better communication project. So that's the suggestion of how the presentation of our current P&L needs to be changed, or the FS presentation needs to be changed. Then the next one is about management commentary. So management commentary, it is not actually a non-bind, like it's not like it's like a non-binding guidance documents. It is provides a framework for preparation and presentation of management commentary on a set of financial statements. So here in the management commentary, the management will be discussing about his future plans. So normally when we are looking at the SOPL or SOFP, we won't get a better idea about what are the future plans of the company, or what are the new projects which are getting launched by the company, how it can change the future growth perspective of the company. So only the management can give a future insight about the company, right? So apart from just looking at the P&L statement or SOFP, if you have a separate item called management commentary, so it provides a management assessment of the entity's performance, position, and the progress, as well as it will provide a supplement information presented in the FS as to explain factors might impact the performance and position in future. Of course, management can give some certain extra insight about the future programs of the company or future growth of the company. Okay, so if you want to know the future part of the company, it's better to have a look at the management commentary. So in the management commentary, what are the contents we have to face? What are the elements of management commentary? First one, we will discuss about the nature of the business, the management's objective and strategies, as well as the current entity's resources, risk, and relationship. So the key performance measures that the management used to evaluate the entity's performance. So these are the different elements coming as a part of management commentary. What are they? The nature of the business, management strategies, as well as objective. And management will be discussing about the entity's resources, risk, and relationships, and key performance measures that the management use to evaluate the entity performance. So these are the factors that will be included as a part of the management commentary. Even that's a part of your current issue. So next one is business combination. So currently in the definition of business, the way we are explaining the definition of business is having certain limitations. So completely we cannot say that the current definition of business we have, there are some difficulty in determining whether it is just an asset acquisition or a business acquisition or acquisition of a business. So the board wished to clarify that. So now they have come up with the factor that business is a set of activity that currently provides no outputs is only a business if it includes an organized workers to convert another acquired input into output. So in effect, it means to say that there should be an input as well as there should be a process as well as there should be an output. So business is a set of activity in which there is an input as well as there should be a process as well as there should be an output. Then only we can say that it is a business. Suppose if the transaction does not mean to be a business combination, if you're just acquiring just try focusing on a license or a group of similar item, we are just focusing on acquisition of a particular type of asset. Our main objective is to get the asset rather than acquiring the business. Our objective is to get that asset. Then we can't say that it's a business combination. Okay, the transaction is not a business combination if substantially all the fair value of the total asset acquired is concentrated in a single asset. For example, a license or a group of similar items such as a 5 plots of land. So by acquiring that company, you're just getting the land. Apart from that, there is no input, process, or outputs are happening there. Then we will say it as just we will discuss it as just as a business combination rather than assuming it as a, so we won't say it as a business combination, we'll just consider it as a asset acquisition. Okay, so that's a change that happened to the business combination. Even it has been tested many times in the past papers. So of course these current issues are already got tested. The changes in the happened to the business definition and all this stuff. Okay. Next one, the disclosure draft or discussion paper. So discussion paper, I have told that after discussion paper, it will be the exposure draft and finally it will amended as a standard. So currently in IAS 32, we don't have enough proper clarity about the definition of financial liability and equity. So if for equity, they have told that it is just a residual interest in the net assets of a company. And asset means it's a contractual obligation and obligation to deliver cash. That's it. Otherwise, obligation to deliver financial asset or liability under unfavorable condition. But this definition is not enough to confirm the fact that whether it's a liability or a equity in many of the situations. So the consequence of classification. So equity and liability are both presented in the different portion of the SOFB. So if you are making any mistake while judging whether it's a liability or equity, it can impact the overall financial position of the company. So due to subsequent remeasurement, the change in the carrying amount of the liability are reported in the financial performance, not for the equity. So in the same way, equity, we know that subsequently we don't need to give more movements for equity. But for liability, if we are following almost amortized cost model, subsequently the figures can change in a very higher way. So if you are not properly judging the fact that whether it is a equity or liability, of course, it can impact the financial statements of a FS. So as per the current definition, they have told that the proposals that will come in future will be with regards to liability. Suppose if you have a contractual obligation that is an unavoidable contractual obligation to transfer the cash or another financial asset at a specified time other than liquidation. So before liquidation, of course, we know that at the time of liquidation, even the shareholders will get settled off, right? So before the liquidation, if we have a contractual obligation to deliver cash, then we will consider it as a liability. Let's say bond or whatever it is, there is a redemption period. So after that redemption period, we have to pay the money back. So it is not happened. We are not just giving back the money because it is a liquidation situation. So that's some of the addition they have came up. They are proposing to the change in the definition of liability. First one is a timing feature. So an unavoidable contractual obligation to transfer the cash or another financial asset at a specified time other than the liquidation. Then amount feature. Amount feature means an unavoidable contractual obligation for an amount independent of the entity's available economic resource. Suppose if that settlement of that obligation will make us to take some finance from outside because we can't pay it from our own existing resource. If you have to incur, if you have to take up the finance from outside to set off that obligation, even that can be considered as a part of your liability. So in order to consider something as a liability, these two factors will be considered. First one is a timing future and second one is a amount future. So in the timing future, we are considering the fact that it's an unavoidable contractual obligation to transfer the cash or another financial asset at a specified time other than liquidation. So that's about the timing future. In the amount future, we will discuss about an unavoidable contractual obligation for an amount independent of the entity's available economic resource. So we have to take the resource from outside in order to settle that obligation. In that scenario, we'll consider it as a liability. So clear, everyone? The proposal which have came into the definition of liability. So clear, guys? Okay, so next one will be so next one is an important factor, but it has not tested yet. So there's a likely chance that this will get tested next time. So this is with regards to the deferred tax to assets and liabilities arising from a single transaction. So as per IAS 12, it says that it is giving an assumption. It is giving an assumption that whenever we are recognizing criteria of IAS 12, deferred tax liability is not recognized on initial recognition of an asset or liability with no SOPL consequence. So this is the recognition expense we have. Okay. So one of the example is like when we are recognizing lease, we know that we will recognize the right to use as well as lease liability at the same date. Okay. So subsequently, it is just not creating a SOPL impact. So without creating at the initial recognition itself, we are recognizing an asset as well as a liability at the time of recognizing the lease. So with regards to lease, we are not supposed to create any deferred tax liability because initially itself we are giving it as an assumption. So even though we know that, but in future when we are making the lease payment, if it is in arrears or in advance, of course it can give to certain temporary difference. As a result, it will lead to deferred tax liability as well, or deferred tax temporary difference will be there, and we have to create deferred tax then. But since we are giving as an assumption at the initial recognition itself, on the future, even though there is a temporary difference happens, as a result of this lease payments, it won't be recorded in our FS because it's an assumption currently in IAS 12. So the IAS 12 proposal have changed that, told that initially, even though it's a asset or liability, if it is not having an impact on SOPL, it's fine. But it won't be considered as a assumption. In future, of course, when we are making this lease payment or something like that, there can be some temporary difference on the basis that whether we are making the payment in accrual or in advance. We know that there will be difference because cash authorities will be accounting it as per the cash basis, and we will be following the matching concept or the accrual basis. Okay, so as a result, it can lead to deferred tax liability as well as deferred tax expense. Okay, so subsequently, because of that change, since we are not giving the recognition initially, even this kind of difference are getting ignored. So the proposal says that the board also noted the recognition assumption is not needed for transaction that give rise to both assets and liability. The board is proposing amendments to require a company to recognize deferred tax for temporary difference that arise on such transaction. So if there is some temporary difference arising on such transactions in future, of course, the board is proposing to require a company to recognize this deferred tax for temporary differences that arises on such transactions. So please note that please note this part because it is a current issue but haven't got tested yet. So it can come up for your exam. this time. So please note that. So these are the main current issues we have with regards to the accounting standards. So please note it down, guys. So is it clear, everyone? Till now, is it clear, everyone? Any doubts in the current issues which you have discussed till now? Can you reply in chat if you have any doubts? Perfect. So next one, it is with regards to the concern that how will you account for crowdfunding? So what do you mean by crowdfunding? Crowdfunding means the fund which you are generated through internet. Okay, rather than issuing debt or something like that, we are generating the fund, or we are generating the small amounts of capital from a large number of individuals to finance the new business venture. So nowadays crowdfunding are happening, especially in countries like Japan and China. That's where it's actually started. It's not that much getting trended here in India, but nowadays some of the companies have started using crowdfunding. So the crowdfunding makes use of the easier accessibility of vast number of networks through people, through social media, and crowdfunding websites are there. So through this website, the investors can pool their fund, and with potential to increase the entrepreneurship by expanding the pool of investors beyond the traditional circle of owners, relatives, as well as venture capitalists. So even though without having higher connections in a particular company, if you have the fund, we can easily give it to a company through crowdfunding website. So even for the company, they can easily access to new financial sources rather than just focusing on some traditional equity, debt, as well as this venture capitalist and all this stuff. So there are different types of crowdfunding. So it depends upon the nature of that investment, we have to account for it. First one, if we are investing in a company without expecting any permanent return, it's just like I'm investing in this company and I'm expecting a return in the form of dividend, then the company will accept this particular cash. It will be debit cash, and the credit here will be accounted as an equity. It will be accounted as a shares. Suppose if the investor wants a permanent return, a fixed rate of return every year, then it will be accounted as a debt as per IFRS 9. Then even there are certain crowdfunding in which the companies, we know that suppose if it's a Apple next time Apple is coming up with an offer that, so we are building up some exclusive phones. So whatever they will give this, first of all they will make a wish list, okay, and let's say the customers can apply for that, and they will be describing about the new features of the phone, but they will keep a condition that if you have to buy that phone, the 50% should be paid in advance before 1 year. So of course every one of us are trusting Apple, right? So if the Apple will take a 50% of the actual market price of that phone, so here the Apple is getting the fund in advance, and whatever the fund they required for the research and development on all these stuffs, or for the manufacturing of the manufacturing process, as well as the packing or whatever it is, whatever the cost they have to incur with regards to the production of that phone, they are getting in advance. So here they are taking it from customers as an advance amount, so it will be treated as a revenue. because it is from customers we are taking the fund to produce the products which they are actually desired for. Then sometimes we used to give the crowdfunding can happen where it will be given as a grant. It's like without any return, without expecting any return, we are investing it. It's neither an equity, neither a debt. In such scenarios, the crowdfunding amount which we received as a charity donation will be treated as an income by the company. So, so even of that's not questionable. It can be questionable in the recent exams because it is not yet tested too much is crowdfunding. Okay, so the crowdfunding can be accounted in four different ways, depend upon the nature in which actually we are investing it in we are getting the fund in the company. If it is not for a permanent source of return, then it is equity based. If they are asking for every year they want a particular certain percentage of return from the company, then it will be debt based, and another one will be reward based, and finally charity donation treat it as an income. So these are the four different ways in which we can treat the crowdfunding. So of course it will come as a discussion part. So that's one of the highlight of this current issues. The current issue will not ask you to interpret it with the scenario too much. It will be a direct question. You just need to discuss about the current issue. That's it. So is it clear everyone how to account for the crowdfunding? How to account for the crowdfunding? Is it clear everyone? Perfect. So last one, it is accounting for cryptocurrency. So we know that these are some electrical currency and it is something which is generated through internet, and it is simply like some of them who are some of the software engineers who are running behind it, and it is just generated through some programming language. So if the programs works properly and finally if they are getting the results for that equation, that's how they are generating the cryptocurrency. So it's just like a digital currency. Okay, so it is not decentralized, so that is not like legal tender is there because it is not monitored by RBI or something like that, and it is recorded in the distributed ledgers because it is coming as a blockchain. Okay, so the question here is how will you account for this cryptocurrency? First one, normally if it is cash and cash equivalents, we know that we have IAS 7. That's how we prepare the statement of cash flow, and it should be the cash definition is given by IAS 7, but it is not meeting the definition of cash. Okay, it is not an actual cash, it is not an actual cash physical equipment, and it can be exchanged. Normally cash can be used in exchange for some goods and service, but currently we know that if if Carpens is giving me the payment in the form of cryptocurrency, I won't be accepting it. It can be accepted, but it is not mandatory that I have to accept it. So it is not a widely accepted exchange. Okay, it cannot be used widely for, in exchange of goods or services. As well as there is no legal tender, as I've told, there is no RBA or some any monetary head to control it, and the monetary value is derived from some other currency. Okay, so these are the factors through which we cannot consider this cryptocurrency as a currency, and we cannot account it as per IAS 7. So the next question is which standard should be applied? If it is not the IAS 7, then which standard should be applied? So if it is not recorded as per IAS 7, the next available standard we have is financial instrument. So financial instrument means it is any contract that give rise to a financial asset to one entity, as well as financial liability or equity instrument of another entity. But here, if you are purchasing a cryptocurrency, it is like an asset. Okay, it is like an asset for you, but it is not liability for anyone else. It is just that in the current world market, I think something 21 million is the maximum amount of cryptocurrency that we can generate. So once it is found out, later on there won't be any increase or decrease. So it is just like having an asset in your hand. There is no liability or something. If you're purchasing a building, it is an asset for you. It is not a liability for anyone else. So it is same like here in the case of cryptocurrency, it's just like you are purchasing an asset. So and the opposite side, it is not creating a liability for another party. So we cannot use the definition of financial instrument there. It is not made in the definition of financial instrument there. Then the question is how to account it. How will you account it? It will be accounted as a intangible item. Intangible asset standard will be applied for accounting for cryptocurrency because it is identifiable as well as it is non-monetary and as well as does not have a physical existence. Okay, so identifiable means of course it is having a individual value. We can sell it separately. Okay, so it is identifiable as well as non-monetary. The value changes, keep on changes. Okay, the Ethereum and these are the different steps we have in the form. These are different forms of cryptocurrency, the Ethereum or something like that. Okay, the value keep on changing, so it is it is not a monetary asset. So it is non-monetary as well as without physical acceptance. So if all these criteria are met, then the cryptocurrency can be accounted by a once if I am purchasing a cryptocurrency, I can account it as my intangible asset. There are some people who are trading with this as well as dealers or brokers are there for conducting the trading of this particular cryptocurrency. For them, if for the dealers or brokers, how will they account it? They will be accounting it as a IAS2 item. If the purpose is anything apart from dealers or brokers, then we will be accounting it as per IAS 38. Okay, so these are the different current issues we have to discuss here, and that's what about the recent current issues. And there is another thing called how to account for the how miners will account for it, but it is not a part of our syllabus. It is just something you have to learn. So miners means as I've told, they are the ones who actually make this cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is something like it's a programming method through which if an equation comes properly and if you get the results for that equation, you can generate one cryptocurrency. It is like that. So when the amount of time which we spend for it and this or are known as the transaction fee. So whatever the research expense that we incur by the miner for generating a cryptocurrency, for him it is a transaction fee. Okay. So blockchain means here the rewards are getting in the form of block. Suppose if someone else is sending me, if I am purchasing a 10 cryptocurrency, I won't be getting 10. I will only get 9. That one will be an income for that generator or the miner. So it will be purchased in the form of block reward. So block reward means to create the valid block, the miners needs to guess the correct proof of work. So miners does not mine anything but provide a service. So here it is like they are providing a service. So as a result, as I've told now, when I'm purchasing 10 cryptocurrency, I will only get 9. The one will be going to him as a income. So even the return that he is getting in the form of cryptocurrency. So he will account it as a income because here we are using the conceptual framework definition because it is increasing its assets. It is increasing the asset of miner. So he can account it as a income in his P&L. So the miner will be accounting. Miner is not the one who is trading with it. So the miner will be accounting for this particular. He will be incurring transaction fee whenever he is estimating the while doing the research and development for generating a cryptocurrency, he will be incurring some expense. That will be accounted as a transaction fee. And the block reward is like when someone purchases the cryptocurrency out of, if I'm purchasing, let's say if I'm purchasing 10, one will be given to the miner. So that's the actual income for him. We won't get the whole 10, only we will get 9. So that one will be the income for that particular miner. And we will be accounting it as an income as per conceptual framework definition because it is increasing the wealth. We know that as per the definition, if there is an increase in asset or decrease in liability, we can consider it as a income. So here, as a result, when someone is purchasing the cryptocurrency, even the miner will get one cryptocurrency. So the miner will account it as a income because it is increasing its wealth, increasing his or her wealth. So that's why it is by applying consistent framework, the miner will be accounting for this particular cryptocurrency transaction as an income. Whenever someone purchases cryptocurrency for them, it will be an income. And for the brokers or dealers, they will be accounted as per IAS2. And one who is purchased, if I am the one who purchased it for the buyer, he will account it as IAS32. So these are the 3 standards that we follow, or 3 accounting rules that we apply here in IAS for accounting for cryptocurrency. Apart from that, there is not a individual standard have come up right now. So we'll be using some of the existing standards. So whenever we are finding difficulty with regards to accounting for this crowdfunding or cryptocurrency, currently we are using these standards to cover up that drawback. So miners part, it won't be tested. Suppose if they're asking something, it will be like either we have to account it as per IAS 38, or if you are a dealer or broker, then it should be account as a IAS 2 inventory. We'll be following IAS 2 inventory method. So these are the main current issues we have to learn here in SBI. So out of which this cryptocurrency, crowdfunding, and this part, especially the assumption of that IAS tool, much tested in the past. So you have to focus on these three areas. That is the proposal change to IAS tool and how to account for cryptocurrency as well as how to account for the crowdfunding. So is it clear, everyone? So these are the main current issues we have to dealt here. Can you reply in chat if you have any doubts? The deferred tax part is very simple. It's because currently whenever there is a transaction, I will explain like. So currently when we are accounting for lease, we know that and the initial recognition, in the initial recognition itself, there is a right to use. That means we are creating an asset as well as we are creating lease liability. So they are creating a liability as well. So currently, as per IAS tool, for this type of transaction which can give rise to initial recognition of asset as well as a liability, IAS tool is not considering such transactions for accounting for the deferred tax liability. But we know that in future there can be some difference, because while we are making the lease payment, sometimes we can pay it in arrears or in advance. So as a result, currently we have some temporary difference are happening in real terms, but it is not taken into account because of the assumption currently provides in IAS 12. The proposal have came up with the factor that the new proposal will be, even though it's a transaction which leads to an initial recognition of an asset as well as liability, we won't be giving it as an assumption. In future, such transaction, if it is lead to any temporary tax difference, of course we can account for deferred tax account here. We have to create the deferred tax account here. So that's a proposal I've came up with, but currently it's an assumption. So that's the current issue. Is it clear? So it is like a summarized note. So this is what you have to learn from the current issue. It is not just like you have to mug up the whole stuff. So is it clear, everyone? So out of which I want you guys to concentrate on these areas such as the management commentary, the business definition, everything have tested in the past. So this is exposure draft 2019, especially this part, the tax. It is exposure draft 2019 in last year in May it came. So of course it can test now. It haven't much tested as of now. So please have a look at it. I will be sharing this file. Yeah, I will be sharing it in the group. I will share it now. Okay, so is it clear, everyone? So next we can discuss about some of the reporting standards which we haven't discussed much. So we'll discuss about some of the reporting standards. So can you see that? Can you see the standard? So I have already shared the video of IAS 8 and IFRS 5. So now we'll be discussing about IFRS 8. So IFRS 8 is about operating segment. So whether we are to treat it as an operating segment. So the subsidiary and all we can account it as an operating segment. So the operating segment aims to assist the users to understand the past performance as well as to understand the risk and return of each segment and to give a better informed judgments on the basis of that individual performance of a segment. Okay. So according to the definition, what do you mean by operating segment? So operating segment is one whose results can be regularly reviewed by a chief operating decision maker, thus giving the users of the accounts an internal view of the company and how the results are reviewed. So they will be having the management commentary as well. So internally, the users will get to know that how well that particular segment is performing. Okay, so that's the definition of operating segment. So operating segment is a separate part of a business whose results are regularly reviewed by a CODM. CODM means Chief Operating Decision Maker. If this definition meets, then we can consider it as an operating segment. But if you have to provide the disclosure, if you have to operate segments, results must be disclosed only if the following tests are met. So the first primary test is, first one, we have to consider that whether the segment review is greater than 10% of the total revenue of the whole business. Whether the revenue of that segment is greater than 10% of the total revenue, that is internal and the external revenue. The second one, the segment profits are greater than 10% of the total profit, excluding the loss, as well as the segment assets are greater than the 10% of the total assets. So if these three are the primary criteria, so apart from that, there is a aggregate criteria means that, so whatever the segments which you have identified by using this rule, that is the first primary criteria rule. Let's say we have identified three divisions, A, B, C. So now I will aggregate the revenue of these three divisions, that is A, B, C. And if total reportable segment revenue does not make up to 75% of the external revenue, then additional segments will be added. So if ABC together does not contribute to the 75% of the external revenue, let's say I will include an additional segment to this combo. So as a result, even this D will become a segment right now. Even the results of that D also should be disclosed. So this is a secondary criteria or something like that. We can consider the second criteria. So the primary criteria for selecting the segments to be disclosed is this 10% criteria. Then there is a second criteria, that is 75% criteria. 75% criteria means out of the segments which you have already selected by using the, if you're summing up the total revenue of this three operating segment, let's say there is three operating segment A, B, C. So if you are just summing up the aggregate of these three figures, if you are not getting more than 75%, we can include the results of some other segments to it, to that combination. So as a result, whatever the segments which are additionally coming up, which as a part of, which is coming up as a part of this combination, will also be considered as a operating segment. So is it clear, everyone? What are the factors to make sure that whether this disclosure of operating segments to be done or not? What is the two different primary factor? What do you mean by this primary criteria and secondary criteria? Are you clear with it? Any doubts? Any one of you want me to explain it? Are you clear with the primary criteria and secondary criteria for disclosure? If you made the definition, we can say it as an operating segment, but if you have to disclose the results, then first of all, you should meet the primary criteria. If the primary criteria is not met, then we will check the secondary criteria. Is it clear, everyone? Any doubts on that part? Okay. The same way, two or more segments can be combined if the following features are met. Let's say ITC. We know that the Indian Tobacco Company, they have different divisions, but all of the divisions are different. Are they providing the same activity, or is the customers are same? No, they are completely different. So ITC cannot combine their segments together. But if, let's say if there is an institute, let's say Carpens is having different, or Carpens, or it can be anything of Phoenix or Lexia or whatever it is. So these institutes have different centers all over the Kerala or across the country. So this institute, if they have a central unit and it is coordinated by a chief operating division manager, so then each segment will be considered as an operating segment. But if you want to combine this operating segment, we can do it, because all these centers are providing the same kind of features, because the nature of the product as well as service are same, the nature of production process is same, the type or class of customers is same, the method used to distribute the products or service is the same, and the nature of the regulatory environment is same. So if this all items are met, if all these criteria are met, then if they have similar economic characteristics, then two or more operating segment can be combined to form a single operating segment. But if any of this having different, let's say if the product or service are different, or the production process are different, then we cannot combine it. We can combine it only if this following criteria are met. So once we select a particular segment, so what we know that what are the criteria for making sure that whether we need to disclose this particular segment or not. So next one we are going to discuss is about what are the items should be disclosed. So we have to disclose the segment revenue, as well as we have to disclose the segment results, segment assets, segment's liability, the capital expenditure, the depreciation or amortization, as well as we have to disclose some other non-cash expense. Okay, so this all criteria have to be disclosed. Once these criteria are met, once the above criteria are met, then these are the factors to be disclosed. Okay. So next one, the general disclosure. General disclosure means, first of all, we need to discuss the fact that how operating segments have been identified, whether it is to primary indicators or through by considering the secondary factors, as well as the product or service that the group provides, as well as reliance on major customers, as well as the geographical information. Okay, so these are the general disclosures we have to make. Apart from that, these are some of the specific disclosures we have to do. Okay, so that's what I've told earlier as well. This IFRS 8 or IAS 24, there is nothing to calculate. These are certain disclosure standards. Okay. Then next one it is IFRS 1, that is first time adoption of IFRS. So when the IFRS has been adopted first time, especially it's stating that for the first time we have to prepare the current year's FS as per IFRS, as well as restate the prior year's comparatives under IFRS, and reconcile the current year's profit under IFRS to the profit that would have been reported under the local GAAP. So these are the main three changes we have to make whenever there is a first time adoption of IFRS. So when the company is first time getting adopted to the IFRS, so these are the changes they have to make. They have to start preparing their current year financial statements under IFRS, restate the prior period comparatives under IFRS, and we have to reconcile the current year's profit under IFRS to the profit that would have been reported under local GAAP. So we will reconcile it and we'll discuss about the difference. It can happen if you are following IFRS and their local GAAP. So these are the factors to be considered, or factors to be considered when we are first time adopting a IFRS. Okay, so that is with IFRS 1. The next one, it is about IAS 24. In IAS 24, it's another disclosure standard. So here they are mentioning about the related party transaction. So what are related party? If there is a control entity, a related party is a party to an entity if it either controls or is controlled by or is under a common control with the entity. So let's say there is a parent and a subsidiary, and this subsidiary having another subsidiary. So this, for both, this one there is a common control, that is a parent. So this parent is related party to this subsidiary as well as related party to this subsidiary. Or if it either has an interest in the entity that gives significant influence over the entity, that is parent and associate relationship. If they have a joint control, then that's another thing. Let's say VA, that is Vodafone Idea. We know that Vodafone having a control in this one, as well as Idea is having a control in this one. So for VA, Vodafone is related party as well as Idea is related party, but V and I are not related parties. Okay. Then if it's an associate as well as a joint venture in which the entity is a venture, the member of key management person of the entity. So directors or key shareholders, or if you are holding any of the key management person, director or the key manager, CEO, CFO, this all are considered to be the key management personnel. This all are related party transaction. As well as a party is related to an entity if it is a close family member of any of the above, that is the spouse or the wife or the partner of this particular related parties which you have mentioned above. Then is an employment benefit plan for the employees of the entity or of an entity that is related party of that entity. So if you are running off an employment scheme for the employees of the entity, okay, it's a post-employment benefit plan for the employees of the entity or any of the entity that is related to the part of the entity, even we can consider it as a related party. So these are the different situations in which related party can come. So have you understood that different situations? What are the different situations in which we can call someone as a related party or not? Is it clear, everyone? Okay. So whenever there is a related party transaction, let's say there is a purchase of sales of goods or components or purchase of sale of assets or property. So these are some of the transaction or provision as well as receipt or service or leasing, parent subsidiary leasing or something like that. research and development transfers. Sometimes the parent used to give the space for subsidiary to conduct their research and development, or settlement of other parties' liability if the parent is settling of some of the loans of the subsidiary. This all are some of the related party transactions. Then who is key management personnel? It is someone who is having authority as well as responsibility for planning, directing and controlling the activities of the entity directly or indirectly, including any director of that entity. So they are the ones who are having that much control over the company's overall decision making. So they are known as key management personnel. They are known as key management personnel. So apart from that, there is related party disclosure. So what are the disclosures needs to be done? So as per IAS 24, we have discussed about different situations in which it can be a related party. So what's the use with it? So finally, if you felt that if that company or if that particular person or the individual is a related party, whenever there is a transaction happening within them, so relationship between the parent and subsidiary shall be disclosed irrespective of whether there have been a transaction between those related parties. So in the case of parent and subsidiary, it doesn't matter whether there is a disclosure, whether there is a transaction happening between the parent and subsidiary, irrespective of the fact that there has been transaction happened, the name of the entity's parent, and if there is a different ultimating controlling party, everything needs to be disclosed in the disclosure notes of a subsidiary. Okay. And disclosure of the transactions as well as balance, generally we have to disclose it. If there has been any transaction between related party and entity, disclose the nature of the related party relationships as well as the information about the type of transaction, and if there is any outstanding balance necessary for understanding of the financial statements. So this all elements should be disclosed. And disclosure should be made irrespective of whether a price is charged. Okay. At minimum disclosure, what are the factors to be disclosed? The amount of the transaction, the amount of outstanding balance including terms and conditions, the provision for doubtful debt based on the outstanding balance, the expense recognized during the period in relation to the bad as well as doubtful debt. And the above should be made separately for each of the following. For the parent, if it's an entity with joint control, subsidiary, associate, joint venture, key management personnel, and other related parties. So for all these items, this above mentioned disclosures should be shown separately. If there is a parent, the disclosure should be done separately. If it's an associate, again the disclosure should be done separately. Okay. Then finally, IAS 34. So in IAS 34 is a interim financial report that we are preparing. So in IAS 34, when we are, let's say if we are preparing the interim reporting for January to March. For SOFP, we know that SOFP preparing as on that particular date. So when we are comparing the January to March statement, we will be, let's say we are preparing it for 2020. 1st Jan 2020 to 31st March 2020. So here, this statement will be compared with the statement of December 2019 because it is prepared as on date. Okay, if it is P&L or something like that, we will be comparing with the past year. Let's say if it is currently it is December to 2019, January to March, this period. So here for the P&L, we will be taking the comparing figure as January to March interim report or interim report of the January to March of 2019. If it is P&L, we will do that. In the same way, for changes in equity, we will compare the figure with the interim date to the directive comparative. That is from March 2020 and we'll go back to 12 months. That is from that particular date, again we will take the comparative. Okay, we have to make it cumulative. Same thing will be done for cash flows as well. will be cumulative to date and comparable period. We'll do the cumulative to date and we'll do the comparable period. So for equity as well as for P and as well as for SOCE as well as for cash flows, we will be taking the comparative figures and it will be cumulative to date. Cumulative to date means if it is March 2020 now, we will take the statement of changes in equity for the last 12 months and will be compared with the statement of change equity from March 2019 for the past 12 months. That is from maybe from 1st April 2018 to 31st March 2019. That SOCE will be compared with 1st April 2019 to March 2020. So that's how we'll make the comparison for SOCE and SOCF. Only for SOFP, we can compare the last year's FS, that is 31st December 2019 FS with our 31st March 2020 interim report because it is prepared as on date. Okay. So that's it. So these are the main reporting standard which were left with for us as well as current issues. So we have discussed both of this. Okay. So apart from that, for IAS 8 as well as for IFRS 5, I have given the video. You can just go through it, and if any doubts, please let me know. So even IFRS 5 is important. Suppose if whenever the company is keeping a subsidiary to sale with a view to sale, even we used to apply IFRS 5 there. So please keep a note of that thing. Okay. So that's it, guys. So that's a major part of your syllabus. We have covered almost every important reporting standards. Yeah, I will be sharing these notes. Okay. And finally, as well as most importantly, we have one more component. So we have discussed different ethical questions. So I will explain you how to write how to structure your answer for ethical questions. Okay. So we'll discuss that and wind up today's session. Okay, so next one is like how to write the ethics question. So this analysis and interpretation, you can just go through that. It is nothing but ratio analysis. Even the internal reporting is just like we are considering the financial factors and non-financial factors, and we are merging it together. So that's it. Apart from that, you are not here. Integrator. Okay, so next one is about the exam techniques for writing the accounting as well as ethical issues. So the accounting, will explain it. So first of all, whenever there is an ethical question, I have told that there will be an accounting issue as well as ethical issue in the question. So for accounting issue, first of all, we have to identify which is a relevant accounting standard, and first then we have to explain the correct accounting treatment as per the standard, and explain how that client have done it wrong. Then we have to explain about the FS impact. Okay. So FS impact means whether that change have overstated or understated the profit, or whether it has overstated or understated the expense, or whether it has overstated or understated liability, as well as if you can pass the correct accounting treatment entry as correct. We have to just tell about the correcting treatment. Like if it is required, you can just tell that how to account it actually in the FS. So this is how we'll explain that accounting issue. So just keep that mind map. First of all, we'll explain the accounting standard. So then we'll explain the accounting treatment as per the standard, and we'll explain how the client have done it wrong. Then the FS impact because of that wrong judgment, how it have affected the FS. And finally, as a conclusion, we will suggest the correct accounting treatment. If it's possible, you can write the accounting entry, but it is not required actually. Then we are explaining the ethical issue. First of all, we have to give an introduction of how the wrong treatment could affect the decision made by the stakeholder, whether it's a understatement of expense or there is an overstatement of profit, whatever it is. We have to explain how that. First of all, we have to give an introduction of how the wrong treatment could affect the decision made by the stakeholders. Then we will explain about the fact that which ethical code has been violated, whether it's self-interest rate or objectivity. Okay, and then we will discuss about the ethical threat we have made there. Then finally we'll discuss about the consequence of the ethical standards, and finally we'll give a brief conclusion after considering both accounting and ethical issues. So this is how you should structure your answer for ethics related questions. Okay, so first of all, this is how we'll explain the accounting issue, and this is how you should explain the ethical factors. So in what's the common, this is an introduction paragraph that you can apply mostly in every question. So as per IASCA and every accountant have a duty to ensure that financial statements are prepared in a true and fair manner. If that accountant has made mistakes, that would be unexpected from a professionally qualified accountant. So the directors and accountants, or it can be a director or accountant in the scenario. So you can apply this scenario there. Or the accountant have responsibility to faithfully represent the transaction that the entity has entered into during the year. So this is because various user groups rely on the financial statement to make the economic decision. So the accountant are trusted as professionals, and it is important that this trust do not be broken. So therefore, it is vital that the principle outlined in ACCA Code of Ethics are understood and followed. So this is a common paragraph you can write for every introductory paragraph. So this is what I have told you to write here, an introduction. Okay, we will write an introduction to writing ethics. Then the ethical principle that cannot be violated for SBR. It is not a AAA paper. So mostly it can be objectivity. Objectivity means threat to independence. Okay. Then self-interest threat. Self-interest, whenever there is objectivity, that is threat to independence. So that is objectivity is our ethical code of conduct that has been violated. And explain how ethical threat is violated. We can use this. It can be because of the self-interest threat, that is directors or accountant who is preparing FS may have some sort of financial or non-financial interest over the entity, which will be tending them to do any intentional misstatement in the financial statements. So we can use that. Apart from that, there can be intimidation threat. That is, preparers of FS might be either threatened, like depromotion or removal of job, salary or cut, or bribed by a senior management personnel, which will make them to do manipulation in the FS. So this kind of threat, so if it is forcefully done, it is intimidation. If it is self-interest threat, both will affect the objectivity. Okay, suppose if the preparer of FS might not have or updated knowledge leading to an unintentional misstatement during the FS, then it is professional competence. Okay, then finally, the professional behavior or lack of integrity. even it can be termed as a threat. So here, the preparer of FS might not be honest or straightforward, which may tempt them to do wrongdoings in the FS and could lead to intentional misstatement in the FS due to fraud and error. So this can be either caught as a threat against the professional behavior, or we can consider it as a lack of integrity. So we can either, if you want, you can try using the following points appropriately based on the scenario to add values. It's like ethical responsibilities of our content, that ensure presentation, not to mislead the users, not to harm the credibility of the which you can write in the introductory paragraph. We should be complying with of ethics and conduct and avoid deliberate falsification. A judgment should be independent and not affected by the business pressures. Ensure the compliance of IFRS and framework and local law, that is a local gap. And there should be transparency as in full as well as accurate disclosure. Judge any unfair and inappropriate and unethical circumstances, should not focus on any personal gain. So these are the ethical responsibilities of the account. So consequence of unethical practices, legal action, loss of job, then fine or penalties, loss of reputation of the company and industry, loss of credibility of the profession, sometimes can get jailed, as well as loss of membership. Even if you are asked to do the actions taken, you can say that first of all we will report it to the relevant authority, then we will account it like this audit committee or something like that. If they are not taking a proper action, we can withdraw from that particular assignment, as well as report it to ACCA. So these are the actions which you can taken. So these are the consequences of unethical practice, and these are some of the ethical responsibilities of that one. So you can use this note to structure your answer with regards to ethics. So almost that 6 to 7 marks. If you write some of this direct stuff from this note, you can easily get 3 to 4 marks. And another 3 stuffs, you have to just identify which is the threat actually happened there. It's almost similar in every question. Okay, it is very easy for you to identify it. Okay, so that's it, guys. So that's it for the overall summary I can give from my end with regards to this current issues and some of the recently tested reporting standards we have discussed. And I have shared some of the articles. Apart from that, I will share an article of SME. Even just go through it as well, because SME has tested in September 2020. So there is a slight chance that it can come up for your December as well. Okay, so SME article I will share. So everything apart from that we have covered on a major note. So integrated reporting has been already tested in the past, so there is very unlikely chance that it will get tested this time. So whatever we have covered or discussed today with regards to current issues as well as some of the reporting standard, please consider it to be the more priority one, then focus on other areas, as well as read those technical articles which I have given in the group. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, guys, that's it. If you have any doubts, you can ask me, or if you want me to reverse any further standards on the coming days, we can do that according to your requirement. Even I have told you to just express your concern in the group. If you want me to specifically reverse any of the standards, we can do it. But please update in the group so that it will get notified to the Carpen's management as well. So we will arrange the classes on that basis. So if you want me to take any additional classes for any particular standard, please let me know. We can do that. In this December, it will be something related to change in group structure, because it has been tested recently in the past 2 SEMs. So in March, it was related to foreign subsidiary, and as well as in December, it was related to cash flow. So of course, focus on the group structure, change in the group structure area, step disposal as well as step acquisition. So learn that properly. Then of course, focus on the other part as well. We can't go with the prediction. So sometimes it can come up. Okay. Okay, guys. So that's it for the day. And if you have any doubts, please let me know through the group. Okay.